So I just wanted to say one thing before we get this review started. I'm literally doing this in the middle of the night, and I just got back from watching Sonic the Hedgehog 3. So if you expect any missteps or any mishaps that I say, just mark them down in the comments because I am running on zero fuel right now. So anyways, hope you enjoy my review. So yeah. Since probably my childhood, I've been a really huge Sonic the Hedgehog fan. I mean, when I was in elementary school and in middle school, one of the first games that I ever got was Sonic Rider Zero Gravity. Even though I didn't beat that game, just playing through the maps and eventually watching all the cutscenes on YouTube, it really got me into this huge Sonic phase back then. Eventually, I got Sonic and the Secret Rings and Sonic Rush, and even though I'm still dying to finish those games, just the rush and the challenge of those games really made me excited for what else this franchise could have to offer. So, when Paramount announced and released the first two Sonic movies, they really renewed my excitement for this game and the franchise as a whole. However, when Sonic the Hedgehog 3 was announced and it was going to include Shadow, I really only had some semblance of what the film was going to be. When I dug into Shadow the Hedgehog and Sonic Adventure 2, learning about Shadow's background with Black Doom and his very dark past really got me excited to watch Sonic the Hedgehog 3. I mean, sure, Shadow the Hedgehog felt somewhat edgy for what it's worth. I mean, it was the first Sonic game to actually have guns, but its overall tone was just generally dark and brooding, which was innovative for the time and received a cult following because of that. Fortunately, this film not only manages to balance its mature and family friendly tones perfectly, but it also does a really great job adapting Shadow as a character and his backstory through this pretty lighthearted message about dealing with your pains. It really seems like Sonic the Hedgehog as a whole series is really growing up as we are. Though the first Sonic served more of an origin movie that felt somewhat like a loose adaptation of the original game, and the second film feeling more adventurous with Sonic and Tails' companionship, Sonic 3 really gets in the dirt and gritty. I mean, it still has these comedic tidbits here and there with the entire team dynamics with Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, but it's just generally much more character focused, so it has much more emotional weight to carry. Ben Schwartz's Sonic has just grown on me to the point where I really enjoy his take. He's still the good-hearted, charismatic hedgehog that we've gotten to know in the past two films, and Schwartz bounces off Colleen O'Shaughnessy and Idris Elba really well. The humor is also really great, mostly when it's like a one-off joke. Like there's this one scene where Knuckles explains his fear of ghosts, and it happened when they were all watching Casper, and it was really funny. And speaking about Knuckles and Tails, they do get their moments to shine, specifically in the second act, once they begin hunting down Shadow. Tails in particular really gets this nice moment of sympathy with Agent Stone, who is really pushed into the background by Dr. Eggman. The way that they're able to make this nice connection and find common ground about trying to be a friend with their friends is just so sweet, and it honestly just made me begin rooting for Stone after all this time. I mean, the guy nearly goes topless when Eggman is getting changed, and he actually gets an arc of trying to uncover Eggman's plans in the end, so in the end, that's really something to consider for his character. Speaking of Eggman, Jim Carrey's double act of playing Ivo and Gerald was just honestly too good. Because even though you might have been put off because of all the wacky stuff that was shown in the trailers, and yes, I'm talking about the one Christmas scene where Ivo jumps Gerald, his performance really does come around in the end. Carrey's able to differentiate Ivo and Gerald to a T, as his Gerald is much more sinister and almost creepy compared to the more, well, somewhat incompetent Ivo. He's able to take these subtle expressions for his Gerald, from a simple mustache wave to wacky crushed body movements, and make them somehow even more hilarious yet scary in his own right. There are several scenes that really help capture how these two are different. I mean, you've got this family bonding montage when Ivo and Gerald are in VR, and there's this also a laser scene that occurs in the second act, and the dance scene that they do is just pretty hilarious as well. There's also this really hilarious joke that breaks the fourth wall where Ivo and Gerald realize that they're both being played by Jim Carrey in the same movie, and that one actually got me a loud audible in the theater where we were at. So, but however, overall, Gerald is literally much more serious than Ivo, which makes his real motivations even more intense. In a way, Gerald's not even really the Gerald that we know from Shadow the Hedgehog or Sonic Adventure 2. He feels more like Eggman Nego, who, if you know Sonic fans, also appeared in Sonic Rush. So Funnily enough, he is a descendant of Ivo, and they basically share the same personality of being deceitful to the other characters. So, honestly, making that connection, you can honestly see it. Outside of Sonic and Company, Keanu Reeves as Shadow is just completely intimidating and terrifying. Keanu Reeves is pulling his inner John Wick with a bit of that Johnny Silverhand from Cyberpunk for Shadow, and it just works. You could really feel Shadow's inner pain and suffering that he's going through, which is only exemplified by the flashbacks that were given throughout the film. The flashbacks that we do get between Shadow and Maria adapt the game's versions with so much respect. There's this one scene where Shadow is just questioning his place in the world, and Maria says that he could just be whoever he wants to be. And it just made me so happy for just a little moment. But obviously, you know that it really only lasted temporarily because you know the film is going to lead to Maria's death eventually. So on Maria's death, it was done with as much respect as you can outside of Sonic Adventure 2. And honestly, I think it did Maria's death in this film much better than it did in the game. Because not only does it add more layers for characters like Gerald and Walters, the commander who was present from Sonic 2, but it also adds much more intensity to the tone overall. This upgrade in tone was shown in the first few moments on Prison Island, where Shadow gets woken up after 50 years. The whole prison environment in that scene is just bleak and smoky, but there's these few drops of memories of Maria that Shadow has when he's being activated in a sort of sense. It's accompanied by this grimacing cover of Live and Learn, which in and of itself is present throughout the film, but it's used just at the right moments. Not only does this entire scene just fully establish that Sonic 3 is going to be more foreboding than 1 and 2, but it's also saying to the audience, hey, we know you're growing up, so we'll grow up with you too. This continues on in the first act when Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles get thrown into the action by Gun to stop Shadow. Throughout the film, the three of them are just trying to figure out how to work together as a team because they all know their parts to play, with Sonic being the leader, Tails being the brain, and Knuckles being the muscle. But their individualistic personalities just hold them back from fully accomplishing their goals. Because of this, Shadow's able to take them down one by one in that scene, which really reinforces this idea of needing to control that pride and emotion. This idea is just continually present, even in another scene in the second act when the entire team is in London for that huge heist. Even though the entire sequence was enjoyable, the first part of it, which involved Tom and Maddie trying to sneak in using Tails' holographic device to turn them into Randall and Rachel from the second film, was a bit tedious in the end. I mean, it got a few laughs out of me when they both were trying to get in through the desk clerk, with Maddie being disguised as Rachel being so intense. It just felt somewhat slow to get through until it really escalated in the end once they got through the vault. The entire ending of the second act was just something to behold because it really felt like a punch to a gut, and when you're in theaters, you will know what I'm talking about. The human side stuff in the Sonic films never really felt that strong. In fact, they felt more like an accessory, and that just kind of continues with director Rockwell. Kristen Ritter does give her a bit of that Jessica Jones vibe, but it really only works in the second act. Outside of that, it just feels like she's nothing more than a pawn to Gun. It does feel like she does have a role to play in the future of these films, but given one of the post-credit scenes, of course, teasing this, but I was probably expecting a little bit too much from her. However, outside of that, we also get the return of Wade from Knuckles, which is really, really stellar. I mean, he only really appears as a cameo during the transition between the second and final acts, but honestly, it's kind of okay and good to see that he's still doing okay, because in the end, you cannot get the flames of disaster out of your brain after all this time. And of course, what would Sonic the Hedgehog 3 be without all of its references? I mean, there is just a ton of them, especially in that whole final fight with Sonic and Shadow. But the way that they're utilized honestly just enhances the story. The new Live and Learn rendition from Crush 40 absolutely rocks with all the orchestral backing. And yes, we also do get that Sonic Adventure 2 pose with Sonic and Shadow in their super forms, which was honestly so damn good. I honestly cannot get the image of them fighting the gun robots out of my mind. So, as a whole, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is just absolutely epic in every way. And I sincerely mean that. The way it adapts Shadow's backstory in a way that's just totally right was just intricately done, and characters getting the depth they needed to was also really great. The action's really well animated in the Sonic and Shadow parts and choreographed, especially in the Eclipse Cannon sequence with the two Eggmen just duking it out. The new music renditions are sick, and even the human characters like Tom, Maddie, and director Rockwell, be it as they may, are fun, even though they don't get as much depth here as they have previously. But overall, it's just a really awesome cinematic experience that you need to see for yourself. And given the post credit scenes of this film, I'm really excited and expecting most of these characters to come or arrive for the first time for another film in the future. So, with that said, my ultimate rating for Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is. Yep, 8.5 out of 10. Sure, it still got its problems, but you know what? I really enjoyed it in the end, so hopefully they'll make another one in the future, but who knows? Anyways, I'm signing off for the night because I am just so tired. But yeah, go check out Sonic the Hedgehog 3 in theaters on December 20th.